is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Juliette Mann.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Paris rematch. Emmanuel Macron faces his far-right rival in a runoff for the French presidential election as campaigning for the final round gets underway.
Ukraine says it needs more military aid as President Zelensky warns that Russia's massing troops for a new assault in the east.
Europe looks to phase out Russian energy as EU foreign ministers discuss a possible oil embargo.
Twitter about turn. Elon Musk decides not to join the social network's board after suggesting radical changes to it.
And how do you become an astronaut? China's space station crew have some advice from on high. The day after the French presidential election, the two remaining candidates are back on the campaign trail.
In a repeat of the 2017 contest, President Emmanuel Macron will face his right-wing challenger Marine Le Pen in a runoff in 2 weeks' time. Macron took 27.8% of the vote in the first round, with Le Pen winning 23.1%. Ryan Thompson reports from Paris.
The morning after a national election to choose France's next president, there's a sense of déjà vu. Once again, Emmanuel Macron will go head-to-head with Marine Le Pen. But as the headlines of the nation's papers suggest, the sentiment among many voters here is ambivalent.
I didn't vote for these people, and I don't want them in the second round. I was more in favour of the third runner-up, but it didn't work out by just a few points.
Like a lot of people, we are disappointed to have the same configuration in the second round again, and voting by default is a bit annoying time after time.
The results indicate more polarization than ever before in French politics. In a field of 12 candidates, only 3 managed to achieve more than 10% of votes.
This has also been a moment of reckoning for the parties that held power at the Elysee less than a decade ago. Both the Socialists and the Republicans suffered historic defeats, with neither able to obtain more than 5% in Sunday's vote.
12 million of France's registered voters stayed home during Sunday's election. That means abstention was up from 2017, but not at the record levels some had feared. Both Le Pen and Macron want those people to come out and support them in the second round.
I call on all French people of all persuasions, from the right, from the left and from elsewhere, French people of all origins, to join this great national and popular gathering. Together we will build this victory with enthusiasm and conviction in order to implement the great changeover that France needs.
I invite my fellow citizens, whatever their political leaning and whatever their choice was in the first round, to join us. Some will do it to keep the extreme right out of power.
2 weeks of intense campaigning lies ahead for the country. Macron will push stability and business as usual, while Le Pen is likely to champion her responsiveness to a cost of living crisis. Though the ballot will look the same as it did in 2017, this is far from the same race.
Ryan Thompson joins me now from Paris. Ryan, Macron won that first round fairly convincingly. Will the runoff be closer, though?
Julia, this is a rematch, but it is completely different. There are completely different cards on the table from 2017, the last time these two candidates went head-to-head. notably because according to polls, there's about 6% gap between them, which is far smaller than the 2017 final result, which put 30 percentage points for Emmanuel Macron over Marine Le Pen. So ultimately, as these two candidates hit the campaign trail, heading out across France to pass their message on to the French voters over the next 2 weeks, they are going to try and appeal, notably because, as we mentioned in that report just there were 12 candidates on the ballot. Now there are just 2. So they are going to try and pick up the voters who voted for the other 10 who potentially were falling to the left or right, saying that their policies and their positions on the issues are what is going to be in their best interest come the next 5 years.
Ryan, Macron heavily beat Le Pen at the same stage 5 years ago. So let's talk about what's changed, not just in terms of her approach in the party, but in terms of the issues that are important to French voters.
Yeah, there are still the standard issues that voters here in France are worried about. Immigration, or the reform to the pension scheme, or what age they'll be able to retire at. These are critical issues that will always be in the national debate. But interestingly, we are seeing 2 new ones this year that just weren't around in 2017. One of them, of course, stemming to the country's security, notably in the face of Russian aggression and a war in Ukraine that's not so far. We've, of course, seen the president, Emmanuel Macron, really do his best to engage in diplomatic efforts, taking trips to Kyiv, taking trips to Moscow, trying to be the peacemaker here. And initially, when polling started in early March, it seemed that that was something that French voters wanted. They liked that he was offering stability and business as usual. But as we've seen the economic consequences over the past few weeks, we've also seen French voters begin to feel a pinch in their pocket. They say that their purchasing power is diminishing quickly. Their wages are just not keeping up with the rising price of goods. And that has become issue number 1 for French voters across the political spectrum, from the left to the right. Interestingly, for Marine Le Pen, that has been an issue she has campaigned on since day 1, telling French consumers and French voters that she wants to raise wages to make sure that all of them can have a high quality of life. So if she's able to champion that message over the next 2 weeks, including at the debate, which will be next Wednesday, and really drive home that this is what she will do, while Emmanuel Macron has allowed this to happen on his watch over the last 5 years, well, she could potentially be closing that gap on Emmanuel Macron and look to be a lot stronger during the vote in 2 weeks' time, Juliet.
Brian Thompson in Paris. It's exciting stuff, isn't it? Thank you.
Well, let's explore those first round results a bit further and talk to Douglas Yates, who's a Doctor of Political Science at the American Graduate School in Paris. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme. So what do you take from these results? Do you think this is a sign that France is ready for change, or is it a further backing for Macron, giving him another chance?
Well, my view is that these results had been properly predicted by the polls, that we really should give a hand to the pollsters. There's really was no great surprise. Emmanuel Macron was predicted to receive approximately this number of votes, and he did. Now, as for change, there is a growing storm on the horizon. But if those polls were right in the first round, then they're also going to be right in the second round. That is, they asked voters, if there's a second round, who would you vote for in a race between Macron and Le Pen? And time again, people said Macron. So I think we have every reason to believe that Macron will remain in power, but with a smaller margin than last time. And perhaps 5 years from now, it will be the moment for the right wing to take power.
There is a large slice of voters, though, isn't there, who have voted for other parties, other candidates, such as Jean-Luc Mélenchon. A large number of the votes went to him. So what happens now to those voters? They have a big role to play in whose side to pick next.
Right. Well, many of the people who voted Mélenchon were actually supporters of some of the smaller and other left-wing parties, and they did what we call here a vote utile, a kind of strategic, useful vote. But those people who are Greens or Trotskyists or communists or socialists are never going to vote for Marine Le Pen. So my prediction will be they'll see no candidate for them, and they'll abstain in large numbers. And those who do come out to vote will probably largely make a responsible vote as hostages for Macron, because consistently, whether it was her father or her, there's been an all but Le Pen vote in the second round. I think we should expect that, and I'm sure Macron is counting on it.
I want to ask you a little bit about party politics, because if you look at the two main parties that used to effectively run France, they showed incredibly poorly this time round, didn't they? So what has happened to the Republicans and the Socialists?
It's amazing. Those were the two ruling parties who had alternated in power for decades. Both of those parties split up over leadership battles. When Nicolas Sarkozy betrayed Jacques Chirac and took control of the party, he set a precedent among the Republicans, and one after another there were knife fights until they fragmented. The Socialists split up largely over Europe. That's when Mélenchon left, over the European Constitution. And then there was the battle where Ségolène Royal put her knife in Francois Hollande's back. And so there's been leadership struggles that have divided those two institutional parties, and their voters have been siphoned off by the three new polls: the extreme left, the extreme right, and Macron's center, which is predicted to win.
What do you make of the demographics of people who are voting this time round? Marine Le Pen had more votes in the sort of middle 35 to 64-year-old category, and Macron won in the over 65s.
Right. The people who are older, who say 10 years ago or 20 years ago voted against her father, remembered the Second World War. They had a living memory of what fascism was. Those people are dead now. And so what we've got are a group of people who have no personal memory of fascism, of the occupation. And for them, Marine Le Pen just seems like a Gaullist with xenophobia. As far as young people, the interesting thing, because they're the future, was that they voted overwhelmingly for Mélenchon. That is, if you look at the next generation coming up, there's going to be more on the left than on the right. But you're absolutely correct. The older voting for Macron, the younger for Mélenchon, but the big bulk in the middle are looking for something xenophobic, anti-immigration, and populist. And that's her base. And she might come in with 48, 49%, but she'll lose.
OK, Douglas Yates from the American Graduate School in Paris, thanks so much indeed for talking to us today.
Thank you.
The president of Ukraine says Russia is deploying tens of thousands of soldiers to positions around the east of the country ahead of a new offensive. In an address to lawmakers in South Korea, Volodymyr Zelensky appealed for more military hardware, including tanks and planes, and said Russia can only be stopped by force. He claimed tens of thousands of civilians have been killed in the southern city of Mariupol, where fresh attempts are underway to create a humanitarian escape route. Well, earlier I spoke to Associated Press reporter Philip Crowther in Lviv.
Look, almost every other day, Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, addresses a parliament somewhere in the world, this time South Korea. The call is always the same one, and it is an urgent one from Ukraine. It's for more sanctions, for more military aid as well. This time, his address to the South Korean parliament gives him a chance to concentrate on Asia. He wants the rest of the world to become more involved. But in Asia specifically, well, from South Korea, he wants more weapons, more lethal aid from the likes of India and China as well. He wants a clear condemnation of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which still is lacking from his point of view. But already there is a response from the South Korean Defense Ministry as to that request for more lethal aid. It is essentially saying that's just not going to happen. Here's Volodymyr Zelensky speaking a little bit earlier to the South Korean parliament.
You have something that can be indispensable for us. Armoured vehicles, anti-aircraft, anti-tank, anti-ship weapons. When it comes to survival in a war aimed at the complete conquest of the people, it is necessary to give principled answers. The usual rules for supply of weapons must be reviewed and action must be taken quickly. It is necessary to help.
He also talked about civilian casualties in towns that have been under siege. I mean, what's the latest on the humanitarian corridors in Mariupol and elsewhere?
Yeah, Mariupol is a particularly difficult city in the southeast of the country, a besieged city to get out of for civilians. There are attempts every single day to get these humanitarian corridors to actually function, but over the last few days there has been trouble getting civilians out of there. They managed to just about get out of Mariupol in their private vehicles, though in relatively small numbers, but then buses that are supposed to take them further from there, they can be stopped by Russian forces, for example. That at least is what the Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister told us in her evening update, when she always gives us those numbers of how many people were able to escape these cities that are either already besieged or are expected to be attacked by Russian forces soon. Now, in addition to those humanitarian corridors by road, there is also the possibility for people in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass region, to escape by train. More evacuation trains being put on today by the Ukrainian railways, which quite incredibly is still running normal trains, evacuation trains, getting as many people out of that area that is expected to be attacked by Russia with more force over the coming days or weeks.
EU foreign ministers have been meeting in Luxembourg to discuss the war in Ukraine. Representatives from Ireland, Lithuania and the Netherlands had hinted a Russian oil embargo could be on the cards. Ministers also held talks with the International Criminal Court's Prosecutor General as pressure grows to hold to account those responsible for any war crimes. Well, our correspondent Giles Gibson is in Brussels. Giles, the European Union's Foreign Affairs Chief has been giving a news conference. Have there been any developments on oil sanctions from the meeting?
Yeah, we heard Josep Borrell giving us an update just a few days after the EU brought in their fifth round of sanctions against the Russian economy in response to the invasion of Ukraine. There is now this talk of a potential sixth round, particularly targeting the Russian oil and gas sector. This could lead to accusations from some that the EU is just being too slow here to respond to the events as they move so quickly inside Ukraine and in that conflict inside Ukraine. But Josep Borrell, the High Representative for Foreign Affairs of the EU, was basically saying that talks are ongoing, they are going to keep discussing this, and really nothing is being taken off the table. Take a listen.
But today, no decision was taken, just a general discussion, analysing the figures. It's important to make the difference between oil and gas. Last year, 2021, the bill for oil imports was 4 times bigger than the bill for gas. We're talking about 80,000 million in one side and 20 on the other side. So it's very much important to start with the oil, which is a heavy bill and easier to replace.
Josep Borrell talking about the difference between oil and gas there. He also talked about in that press conference the difference between different member states. So saying some, yes, it's going to be very easy for them to turn off the taps of Russian oil and gas, but saying for other states who are really reliant on Russian imports of fossil fuels, it's going to be much, much more difficult. So really saying that member states need to stay unified on this and keep talking about it.
And Giles, what about a potential war crimes investigation?
Yeah, we saw Josep Borrell giving us an update about this meeting that these foreign ministers in Luxembourg had at the start of the day with the top prosecutor from the International Criminal Court, the ICC. We saw Josep Borrell saying that they are going to be pushing really hard, really, to make Russia accountable for gross violations of international law, as he said in his words. He also pledged EU assistance, both financial as well as technical, to the ICC team that is currently investigating accusations of war crimes inside Ukraine, and he also pledged assistance as well to the local Ukrainian team who are also conducting an investigation. Of course, the ICC launched their initial investigation into potential war crimes right at the start of March, so really just a few days or just over a week after Russian President Vladimir Putin sent troops over the border into Ukraine. But clearly in the wake of those horrifying scenes that we've seen coming out of places such as Bucha, that town just outside of Kiev, there are these growing calls for these efforts to really be ramped up. We have to state, though, that Moscow and the Kremlin have repeatedly said that they are not involved in any sort of war crimes. Their Russian forces are not involved in any war crimes, and they have also denied repeatedly through this conflict that they are targeting civilians in any way.
Giles, thanks very much. Giles Gibson there in Brussels.
Still ahead on Global Business Europe. Have Chelsea met their match? 4 bidders line up for their shot at buying one of English football's biggest clubs.
The British public not only need to know, but they want to know more about China.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
East meets West. We're now at a time when we need the icebreaker spirit.
My first impression when I came to China is I noticed the similarities more than the differences.
It's about understanding each other's culture.
We look at the things that bring our nations together.
My dad is Chinese, my mum is English. I grew up in London, but I went to China to work at age 25.
Whenever I've gone to China, it's just been amazingly welcoming.
The music is beautiful language and bring all the people together.
I'm exploring, I'm experimenting, I'm trying something new, all in the hopes to build a bridge. And I think we definitely need more people doing that.
It was only when I got to know my Chinese father in my 40s that I really got to know the other half of myself.
I hope we make it another 50 years, another 500 years.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dared to think beyond the horizon and to open up our world, on TV and online on CGTN.
I hope that you will all become icebreakers and bridge builders.
Welcome back. Just a reminder that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, we're available 24 hours a day on Freeview.
The UK Finance Minister has referred himself to the government's independent ethics advisor for a full review into his financial dealings. It comes amid continued pressure on Rishi Sunak over his wife's tax affairs.
Last week, it emerged Akshata Murthy had non-domicile status, meaning she did not pay tax in the UK on her earnings abroad. Our correspondent Andrew Wilson reports.
Here he comes, Anita. This is Rishi Sunak.
Rishi Sunak is clearly doing what he can to maintain his reputation and his job. The revelation last week about his wife's tax affairs and non-dom status has sparked opposition attacks and a wider public debate about the Sunaks' wealth and their financial affairs. Akshata Murthy has business interests in India on which she chose not to pay UK tax, a legal financial decision she reversed at the weekend. The finance minister, who has said little in recent days, did say he hoped a review would provide clarity. Sunak joins a list of Conservative finance ministers who acknowledged the issue of high net worth foreigners being allowed to avoid UK tax on their overseas income, but did little to change it.
And lastly, on international tax. It is increasingly clear that in a complex, global, digital economy, we cannot continue to rely on a tax system that was largely designed in the 1920s.
The Sunaks have left Downing Street for the Easter break, but Labour politicians are keeping up the pressure, focusing not on the legalities, but the optics behind his personal finances.
So I think the lack of transparency does raise questions about conflict of interest, but also it's about basic fairness. And I don't think the Chancellor still gets that, and that raises real questions about his judgment.
Murthy owns a significant part of the Indian IT giant Infosys, from which she received about $15 million of income last year. She will have paid tax in India, but her non-dom status means a potential saving of around $2.5 million in UK tax.
Hello.
Rishi Sunak became popular through the Treasury's package of public COVID support back in 2020. His response to the cost of living crisis, however, has drawn widespread criticism. He's long been seen as a potential challenger to the Prime Minister in the future.
Got it.
Downing Street has rejected newspaper reports that staff in number 10 were responsible for leaking Sunak's financial information to the media. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
Elon Musk has decided not to take a seat on the board of Twitter, despite becoming the company's biggest individual shareholder. The world's richest man has previously suggested the social media firm needed some radical changes. Well, let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett, who's in New York. Hi there, John. So once again, Musk keeps us guessing.
Yeah,
Yes, I know. We love talking about Elon Musk. You know, Juliet and Robin, I was thinking he really is the most successful business guru of our time. And he reminds me of the likes of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak over at Apple. And in the very early days, of course, Bill Gates and Paul Allen over at Microsoft, and was Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, and I think even dear old Richard Branson at Virgin in Europe. But it's all focused on Musk these days. And what he did last week, as you said, was to buy 9.2% of a stake in Twitter, making him the biggest shareholder. He paid a cool $3 billion for that. And this weekend just gone, he was due to join the board of Twitter. It was supposed to happen on Saturday, but it didn't happen. What did happen was there was a tweet storm from Elon Musk, basically attacking Twitter, the company that he just bought such a large stake in and was about to join the board of. He talked about taking the company advertising free. He said, why don't we make it the headquarters in San Francisco a homeless shelter? Because he said no one shows up anyway, which was a reference to Amazon, which does have a homeless shelter attached to one of its headquarters buildings in Seattle. And indeed, Jeff Bezos has tweeted this morning, well, it worked out great for us, makes it easy for employees who want to volunteer. And then Musk also tweeted, is Twitter dying? Now, we'll come back to that tweet in just a second. Remember that tweet because it's important to the story. Now, the Twitter CEO these days is called Parag Agrawal. He took over a couple of months ago from Jack Dorsey, who started the company. And Parag Agrawal says in an email to his staff, there will be distractions ahead, referring to the 9.2% that Musk presently holds. But he said our goals and our priorities remain unchanged. And he himself said that it was Musk who declined the chance to be on the board on Saturday. And Parag Agrawal also says that they were looking forward to having Musk on as a fiduciary. Fiduciary is the highest level of financial competence you can have. And if you qualify as one, it means you always put your clients first, in this case, the shareholders of Twitter. So the question is, what now? So he's got 9.2%. He's the biggest shareholder. Fair enough. Had he been on the board, he could have owned up to 14.9% of shares in Twitter, but no more. Well, now he ain't on the board anymore, is he? So the sky's the limit. And the question is, will there be a hostile bid now by Elon Musk for Twitter? He's always been very critical, particularly of its freedom of speech policies. Now, he's not very liquid. He has lots of money, but it's all tied up in things. So he would have to sell things to buy Twitter outright. But he is the richest man in the world. He certainly could do it. And now we come to that final tweet. All the tweets I mentioned just now, he deleted. They were all gone, although Jeff Bezos replied to the homeless one. So it's still kind of there. But the one he didn't tweet was the one that said, is Twitter dying? So we'll see.
Oh, this is so exciting. It could change its form. It could change its own. I mean, we're just going to have to wait and see. And in terms of where that fits into the bigger picture, let's talk about the markets, John. What are you expecting this week?
Yes. Well, it's a good week to talk about the markets on a Monday, and the reason is I can't believe this. I just don't know where the time is going. Where is this year going? We're already at April the 11th, and that means that this very week we begin the process of doling out the corporate earnings in America for the first quarter. So that's the 1st of January through the 31st of March. It already begins on Wednesday with the big banks. JP Morgan Chase, the biggest of them all, starts us off. Also Delta Airlines on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, we'll hear from Goldman Sachs and Citigroup and Morgan Stanley and Wells Fargo, and also United Health as well, which is a very important Dow Jones component. As of the banks, well, it should give us a clue to consumer spending. It is anticipated that the investment bank section of their businesses is likely to take a hit this time round, so we'll see. Report out today says that inflation is forcing Americans to put stuff on their credit cards again at an interest rate of 16%. Can you believe it? That's not very good. And as for the markets on this Monday, well, they're all down at the moment. They're extending last week's losses. And of course, Ukraine and inflation, the rising Treasury yields are going to dominate the rest of the week. And it's a shortened week this week because Friday is Good Friday and this place is closed. Guys?
It'd be interesting to see what those corporate earnings reveal. John Terrett in New York, thank you.
Car sales in China plunged in March, dropping nearly 12% on a year earlier and reversing a 19% jump in February. Localised COVID outbreaks have been blamed for the fall. The China Association of Automobile Manufacturers said sales were unlikely to pick up in April and called on Beijing to bring in supportive measures such as cuts to the auto purchase tax.
China's inflation remained generally stable in the same month, despite the Shanghai COVID outbreak and rising global commodity prices. The consumer price index rose 1.5% year-on-year, higher than the 0.9% rise in February.
UK economic growth fell sharply to just 0.1% in February, down from 0.8% the month before. The figures came despite a strong showing in the services sector in areas like tourism and travel, as COVID restrictions were lifted. Analysts say that was outweighed by a significant slowdown in car and tech manufacturing. Shortlisted bidders for English Premier League club Chelsea have just days left to submit their final offers. The original deadline of April the 11th was reportedly extended to allow those in the running more time to finalise their proposals. The club is up for sale after its Russian billionaire owner Roman Abramovich was sanctioned by the British government. Well, let's talk now to Kieran Maguire, a football finance specialist at the University of Liverpool in the UK. Welcome back to the programme, Kieran. 4 main bidders for Chelsea then. What do we know about them?
They're all US-based bidders. Some of them are looking at it from a private equity perspective. Some of them are existing owners of US sports franchises, and they want to extend their influence because there's a perception, especially amongst American investors, that soccer, especially European soccer, is significantly undervalued by the markets.
So we've seen this somewhat movable deadline then for a decision on who's going to take over the club. How complicated is it to buy a club like Chelsea?
I think that there's an issue in the sense that Roman Abramovich's assets have been frozen by the UK government as part of the sanctions, and as a result of that, he's not allowed to buy or sell anything. So therefore, there would have to be some separate agreement between the government and Roman Abramovich with regards to the sale taking place, and then secondly, there would have to be negotiations as what's going to happen with the proceeds of sale. It does look certainly initially that money will be paid into an escrow account and frozen until as decided by both parties.
So what would make Chelsea a good investment? They've been pretty successful on the pitch over the years, obviously, but is there actual money to be made?
Well, since Roman Abramovich acquired Chelsea Football Club in 2003, the club's lost around about $1.2 million a week. So from a traditional investment perspective, it's got to be seen as high risk. I think there is a perception, however, that Roman Abramovich ran Chelsea Football Club as a trophy asset, and there are certainly opportunities in terms of better cost control and less profligate spending. And also, one area that the potential owners might be looking at is expansion of Chelsea, either through its existing facilities at Stamford Bridge, where it plays football, or to move to another stadium, although given that it's going to be taking place in London, that would come at a cost of at least $2 billion.
So from the club's point of view then, what would be the best fit for them? What do they need after the Abramovich era?
Well, I think if you talk to Chelsea fans, ideally they would like an American version of Roman Abramovich, somebody who is prepared to invest large sums, to effectively write off the loans that have been put into the club, and to allow it to run at a loss. But looking at the profiles of all the 4 bidding groups, I think that's highly unlikely. I think the most that Chelsea fans can hope for is that the new owners will follow the approach which has been taken by the Liverpool owners, which is very much a Moneyball style approach to football recruitment and retention of talent. And on the back of that, Liverpool have been probably the second most successful club in English football over the course of the last 3 to 4 years. And of course, they've included in that winning the Champions League itself.
And there have been reports in the press that Roman Abramovich is interested in buying the Spanish club, Valencia. And here's, of course, a man who's been severely sanctioned by the British government. So what are the chances of him making that work?
Well, Roman Abramovich does have assets which are located outside of the UK, and therefore he could liquidise some of those assets to provide the cash which would be required to acquire Valencia. I think the asking price is around about $350 to $400 million. So for a person of Roman Abramovich's wealth, that should not be too much of a challenge to put together that initial bid.
OK, Kieran Maguire from the University of Liverpool, good to talk to you today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, Pakistan has a new Prime Minister. Can Shehbaz Sharif bring an end to weeks of political crisis?
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the second year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Juliet Mann and me, Robin Dwyer. The headlines again. Paris rematch. Emmanuel Macron faces his far-right rival in a runoff for the French presidential election as campaigning for the final round gets underway.
Ukraine says it needs more military aid as President Zelensky warns that Russia's massing troops for a new assault in the east.
And Europe looks to phase out Russian energy as EU foreign ministers discuss a possible oil embargo.
Austria's Chancellor Karl Nehammer has held what he called direct, open and tough talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow.
He's the first European leader to have a face-to-face meeting with Putin since the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Laura Makin-Isherwood, who's in the Latvian capital, Riga. Laura, what was the Austrian Chancellor hoping to achieve on this trip?
Well, ahead of this meeting, Karl Nehammer, the Austrian Chancellor, said that he wanted to speak truth to President Vladimir Putin, to basically tell him that Russia had lost the moral war in this conflict in Ukraine. Afterwards, after those 90 minutes of talks that took place at President Vladimir Putin's residence outside of Moscow, he said that the talks were open, they were direct, they were tough, and it was not a friendly conversation. He said that it was very clear where Austria stood in this conflict, what its position was. We know that he was calling for an immediate ceasefire, also for humanitarian corridors to be established and also allowed to operate effectively as well. But of course, as you said, there are tens of thousands of Russian troops being reassembled in the east of Ukraine, ready, we believe, and Western nations believe, for a new offensive on the country. So whether or not these talks will result in those requests being granted by President Vladimir Putin isn't really clear, because it may well be that he's already made his mind up about what his next steps, what Russia's next steps will be.
And this war, of course, has been going on for now almost 2 months. What's Russia saying about it now?
Yeah, well, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has given an interview to Russian state TV in which he's said that there will not be another pause in fighting when the next round of peace talks take place between Russia and Ukraine. Of course, there was a pause in the first round, but apparently the Kremlin believes that now the position for them has changed, and that's not going to be granted the next time round. They say that that's because Ukraine offered up a draft peace deal that simply was unacceptable, and Sergei Lavrov said after we became convinced that the Ukrainians were not planning to reciprocate, a decision was made that during the next round of talks there would be no pause so long as a final agreement is not reached. Of course, where NATO's borders lie has also been a real point of contention. That has been one of Russia's hard lines, if you like. They don't want, the Kremlin does not want Russia to expand. And so talk recently of perhaps Finland and Sweden applying to join the alliance seems to have ruffled feathers as well. There was a warning given by the Kremlin spokesperson saying that it would be effectively not bringing any further stability to Europe. Of course, Norway as well has said that it's going to be extending the time that it supplies its troops to NATO's enhanced forward presence. That's the deployment of troops on a defensive basis to the Baltics, here in Latvia, where I am now, to Lithuania and Estonia as well. And so the Kremlin seemingly won't be enjoying that move. And also it appears that they are seemingly looking at pushing forward as well with continued attacks on cities in Ukraine.
And Laura, more global businesses and companies pulling out of Russia.
Yes, and just a couple today include the telecoms company Ericsson. That's a Swedish company, saying that they're going to be suspending operations there and putting their staff in Russia on immediate paid leave. Their safety, the company says, is their utmost priority at this time. And also French International Bank General is also pulling out as well. They're going to be suspending operations, also selling off part of their stake in Rosbank as well. So more and more companies moving away from Russia, from the economy there, and that's going to be hitting hard and eventually hitting the pockets of people, ordinary Russians living in the company too.
Laura Makin-Isherwood in Riga, thank you.
21 Russian airlines have been added to a list of carriers barred from entering EU airspace by regulators in Brussels. Commission chiefs say it's due to safety breaches and not directly in response to the war in Ukraine. It means many more Russians will be unable to holiday in some of their favourite destinations this summer. And that's having a knock-on effect on the tourism industry, just as Europe looks forward to its first full holiday season out of lockdown. We're joined now by Andrew Charlton from the airline consultancy Aviation Advocacy. Good to see you, Andrew. Thanks for coming on. Which destinations are we talking about here? You know, how big is their exposure to the Russian tourism market?
The Mediterranean coast, the south of France, Italy, Croatia are enormously exposed to the Russian market. I guess if I lived on the Russian steppes or east of Moscow, I would look forward to spending a few weeks in the hot Mediterranean sun and swimming in the ocean in the summer. So it will have a serious effect for European Mediterranean countries. Interestingly, the Mediterranean country that it won't have an effect on is Turkey, and indeed Turkey is now gearing up to try to capitalise on as much of that market as it possibly can by setting up charter services and by bringing in extra aircraft to bring Russian customers, Russian passengers down into the Turkish resort towns along the Mediterranean coast, from Istanbul across, of course.
I want to talk a little bit more about Turkey in a moment, but let's talk about what these resorts do, how they've invested to lure those Russian visitors. What's the draw of those places you mentioned?
Apart from heat and sea, that'll get you there most of the time, I think. And the fact that it's different. The investment in the tourism industry in those communities is enormous. If you go to even, and I mean this with no disrespect, even small cities in Croatia like Pula, and go to Pula airport, every second sign is written in Russian. There are Russian translators, there are Russian-based restaurants. No doubt the vodka sales go through the ceiling. There are huge investments in attracting and retaining Russian and Ukrainian, indeed it's got to be said, guests for that entire time, and across Italy, certainly at the north of Italy and around then through to Slovenia and Slovenia and then Croatia. There are huge crowds and huge numbers of Russians come in. It's very difficult to order. It's easier to order a meal in northern Italy in the summer in Russian than it is in Italian.
So we're just coming out of the pandemic. It's probably the first full holiday season for many of these resorts. If they're thinking, OK, our Russian clients, our Ukrainian customers, that there's maybe going to be a squeeze on that, which markets might they turn to make sure they still bring in those important tourism revenues?
That's a great question. The one thing that we have seen, it's obviously the last 2 years have been beyond horrific for not just the airlines, but for the tourism industry. What we are seeing at the moment, and you're seeing it with chaos at airports all over Europe, is that the market is, all this pent-up demand is being released incredibly quickly. And there seems to be a lot of people who think that they've missed 3 or 4 even holidays over the last couple of years, and they're determined to take those holidays. So from a tourism perspective, I hope that the rest of Europe rises to the bait and goes to some of these countries as well. And in fact, if it is somewhat less crowded than normal, then that would be another attraction, one assumes. The other issue, of course, even for Turkey, though, I think I should get in, is, as we were hearing in the report before, the sanctions on the Russian economy are starting to bite. So even if Turkey and other places have opened their doors to Russian guests, that's assuming, of course, that the sanctions work in such a way, that the sanctions fail to work in such a way that the guests still have money to be able to come and take a holiday.
Andrew Charlton from Aviation Advocacy, thank you very much for your insights.
Always a pleasure.
Staying with tourism, and Heathrow Airport has reported its highest passenger numbers since the start of the pandemic. The London hub was used by 4.2 million people in March, almost 8 times higher than the same period last year. People going on holiday and the end of coronavirus travel restrictions were the main drivers. But the airport's CEO has warned the surging demand may not stay that way due to high fuel prices, low economic growth and the impact of Russia's attacks on Ukraine.
Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has won a referendum allowing him to complete his 6-year term in office. He took 92% of the vote, which sounds great, but voter turnout was less than 19%. Obrador had promised the referendum when he was elected in 2018, saying the country could choose to remove him 3 years into his presidency.
In Sri Lanka, 3 former coalition partners have proposed forming an interim government, the latest twist in an economic and political crisis engulfing the country. Protesters have occupied the entrance to the president's office for a 3rd day, calling for the entire parliament to disband. Sri Lanka is on the brink of bankruptcy with $25 billion in foreign debt and dwindling foreign reserves.
Pakistan's parliament has elected opposition leader Shehbaz Sharif as the country's new prime minister after the removal of Imran Khan. The former cricket star was ousted in a no-confidence vote over the weekend after just over 3.5 years in office. Nick Harper reports.
Mohammad Shehbaz Sharif Saab is declared to have been elected as the Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan.
After days of drama, arguments and an ousting, Shehbaz Sharif was confirmed as the new Prime Minister of Pakistan, as the younger brother of 3-time PM Nawaz footsteps to lead the country. Earlier, lawmakers from Imran Khan's party resigned en masse in protest of him being stripped of power. The news of change at the top has been celebrated on the streets of Islamabad by Sharif's supporters. But Khan's own supporters have held protests, angry at his removal and demanding his reinstatement.
In a democratic system, the final voice will be the voice of the people, and the voice of the people is Imran Khan.
The resolution for vote of no confidence has been passed by a majority.
The no-confidence vote on Saturday came after a week of turmoil that saw Khan dissolve Parliament, a move ruled unconstitutional by the country's Supreme Court. Khan's fall from grace is attributed to a row with his powerful military backers, and his position has been further weakened by the country's rising cost of living, something now seen as a major challenge for the new Prime Minister.
Pakistan economy is in really bad shape. We see huge trade deficit. We see that there's been an erosion of foreign exchange reserves. The rupee is tumbling down. The energy sector crisis is intensifying. So this government ideally should take some unpopular decisions to fix the economy.
Shehbaz Sharif will lead the country until the next scheduled elections in October next year. Nick Carver, CGTN.
Still ahead here on CGTN. Shanghai rolls out robots to help as the city's COVID outbreak reaches record levels.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Marawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
gas. So it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
It's the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
the front clear
line.
View of this front line position.
Have you ever wondered how much a human life is worth?
Have you ever looked up at the night sky and considered whether aliens are staring back, or if it's even possible to negligence?
If that sounds like you, it's time to join the Answers Project with me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge.
We've recruited the best brains in the world, award-winning astrophysicists, giants of medical science, and former presidential advisors to help us tackle humanity's biggest questions.
Find the answers wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Shanghai has started to ease lockdown rules in some areas despite record COVID numbers. City officials announced on Monday that they were grouping residential areas into 3 categories. Neighbourhoods which have seen no positive cases for at least 2 weeks will be allowed to reopen. The restrictions are being eased in around 7,500 small zones, with residents able to move around their neighbourhoods while staying socially distant.
The changes come after many Shanghai residents complained they were struggling to get hold of food and basic supplies. There have been some reports of people looting food supply points and confronting police. But the city's medical experts say the zero COVID policy is necessary.
We may be under a false impression now that we have few severe cases. Well, one reason for this is because our vaccination rate is relatively high, so there are now fewer serious illnesses and deaths. But China has a very large population base. A lax strategy can lead to a high number of infections. With a large population base, the probability of severe cases could be low, but the aggregate number of cases will be high. We have an understanding of the Omicron variant, but we are still looking into the learning process. We need to further look into fully understanding the basis of our current strategy, but we do not rule out the possibility of certain adjustments in the future.
More than 100 quarantine sites have been opened in Shanghai, containing around 160,000 beds. To ease the pressure on healthcare workers, robots are being deployed to help with routine tasks. Cheng Tong reports.
This temporary hospital in Shanghai's Pudong district has some 7,000 patients and around 1,700 medical workers. There are 20 robots assigned to tasks ranging from food delivery to patient inquiries.
We have 3 types of robots here: robots to deliver goods, human-shaped robots to chat with patients, and security robots to patrol the site.
When COVID-19 first broke out in Wuhan in 2020, robots were already operational at the quarantine sites. But the robots there were mainly to entertain patients. In Shanghai, the robots are expected to ease the workload of healthcare staff. This has become crucial as more manpower is required to address the city's worst outbreak yet due to the Omicron variant. With more than 180,000 infections reported, most of them asymptomatic.
There are some 20 sections in the quarantine site, and one nurse is in charge of 4 sections. Our delivery robots can help them deliver 28 meal boxes each time.
In addition to cloud mines, other domestic robot manufacturers have also deployed their products in other quarantine sites. Autonomous delivery cars have also been fielded in different communities to help deliver daily necessities. Chen Tong, CGTN, Shanghai.
Now, have you ever wondered what it takes to get to space? Well, students in the United States have been asking that very question to 3 taikonauts on China's space station.
The session, hosted by the Chinese Embassy in Washington, also featured a guest appearance from SpaceX CEO Elon Musk. CGTN correspondent Nathan King reports.
Big welcome to you all.
Ambassador Chen Gang welcomed the world and beyond back to the Chinese Embassy in Washington, D.C., in the first large gathering held here since the COVID-19 pandemic hit. The feeling was, well, out of this world.
What recommendations do you have for kids like myself who aspire to become astronauts in the future?
Students were selected from across the US to ask the 3 Shenzhou 13 taikonauts aboard China's space station questions about their 180-day mission as they prepare to head back to Earth. Among those asking the questions, Miles and Christopher, whose passion for space exploration was fueled by this exchange with the taikonauts orbiting Earth.
To see the first Chinese astronauts go to the first Chinese space station, not just to see what that's like for the taikonauts themselves, but also to see what that's like for the nationality as a whole and how they see their own people going up there. That's really beautiful.
I'm more fascinated with the engineering side of things. I've always shared a passion for that. But if somebody offered me the chance to go to space right now, absolutely, I'd go, yes.
There was a special surprise appearance from SpaceX founder Elon Musk, who had words of encouragement for the next generation of space pioneers. And a former NASA astronaut, Donald Thomas, invited the audience not to think of themselves as American or Chinese, but as a common community of Earthlings.
Today, if you ask me, hey, Don, where are you from? I'm going to say, I'm from Earth. And it no longer matters. It doesn't matter what city, state, country, continent, language, religion. None of that matters. We are all Earthlings here.
Chinese President Xi Jinping said closer people-to-people exchanges, and mutual learning for that matter, are a sure way to eliminate estrangement and misunderstanding and promote mutual understanding among nations. By holding this event, we can shorten the distance between the Chinese and American people and enhance the friendly feelings between the 2 countries. Especially for the younger generation, their mutual recognition, this is a very meaningful event. I hope that events like this can continue in the future. The Chinese Embassy in the United States will continue to maintain close communication and exchanges with all walks of life in the United States to promote cultural and people-to-people exchanges between the 2 countries.
And that feeling was shared throughout here at the Embassy, that no matter what differences we have here on Earth, when we look up to the heavens, we all share the same sense of wonder, the potential for exploration and discovery. The Chinese space program is a growing part of that spirit. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.